Hello everybody, Michael Holman here with Curt's Clocks, the Atmos Repair Specialist at www.curtsclocks.com. And today we're going to show you how to partially disassemble an Atmos 540 and relieve the wind on the mainspring. So forgive me if the quality of this video isn't exactly high definition, because I am wearing a wearable camera that I can perform this service hands-free, using my hands to do my work, and the camera's just kind of riding on my head. So anyway, this is what we're going to do. Sometimes these 540s have a tendency to become overwound, and typically it's overwound if it's like running 10 minutes fast a day, regardless of any attempts to regulate. And this happens through exposure to temperature extremes. High variations, like if it's sitting out on your doorstep or wherever, sitting in your car is one that's happened, where it gets down, at least below 65 at night. That bellow contracts, it raises up to 80 in the day, that bellow expands, and it's pumping your mainspring. It's winding up your mainspring, and your mainspring is overwound. This can happen through transport in the mail as well, where it's coming from a cold climate to a warm climate, or on the delivery truck, and you get these tendencies to overwind. But anyway, I'll show you how to relieve the problem. You start by taking your panel out here. Move that right out of the way. And forgive me if the camera's kind of shaky or jittery. It's on my head, so it's hard for me to avoid that. And we'll take our nice long screwdriver here, and we'll remove these four corners, pressing downward, and get some good torque with the longer screwdriver. And you can avoid damaging your screws if you give it good downward pressure, and also use the proper fitting screwdriver, of course. We're just going after these four corner posts here. We don't touch those middle ones there, holding the clock on the base. Get these out of the way here. Okay. Now we take the fingers around the base, lift out. Avoid letting our glass fall and break. Get the clock down here. Move our cover up out of the way. If the glass wants to keep doing that, you can turn your cover and set it like that. Okay, we'll leave the bellow on for now. And we've got to remove our hands. And to do so, I move the minute hand around so that it's facing me like so. Take my hands puller, which is here. And I use an old-fashioned hands puller that isn't quite long enough for a 540. But the reason I use it is because it's able to be repinned. So often these pins will break because they're long and narrow, and they're just, they have to be that way in order to do it, but they will bend and break, especially the Time Savers model. So I'm using this old-fashioned one because it can be repinned. You get on a lathe and remake that pin and fit it in there. So, but anyway, in order to remove the hands on a 540, my hands puller requires an additional piece that I have saved over here, which is a small pin that will fit into that hand. And I would be careful doing this. I actually don't recommend that you do this because it's kind of risky. Once you learn all the rules, you're then allowed to break them. But until then, you have to kind of go by the book. So I won't recommend that you remove your hands this way. Hopefully your Time Savers hands puller can do that. I can't remember if it can or not. But if it can't, you can always remove your dial by just avoiding the hands and moving it around them. And you want to be careful with this part of the job, because you don't want to break that center or that fourth wheel shaft. It's a expensive part, and it's easy to do, so you want to take precaution when doing this part of the job. Okay, we got our hands off, put our Hands pull her away. Now we go in here and find that pin, which is right here. Bingo. Put that back and save it. Now removing the hour hand, it's just a press-on fit, but it's somewhat tight, so you got to rock it back and forth carefully and cautiously while pulling it off. We got that out of the way. Now we'll go and take our dial off. We do that carefully, not to scratch the dial, and also putting my hand behind the dial rest keeps me from putting all my downward pressure on that dial rest and bending that all up. We get them all loosened up, and we'll pull our screws out of the way like that. Okay, lift our dial up, get our paper dial with it, put that out of the way. Now we'll come over here and remove our dial rest, dial pan. Again, downward pressure helps to prevent marring up those screws. And as you can see, this is a somewhat long screwdriver too, which gives me good torque, and it fits into that screw head just perfectly. Get our dial rest off. Now we'll take the clock and set it up, and we're going to remove our bellow now, which is a bayonet fitting, and in order to do so I'm pressing against these legs here and hand on the back of the drum, pressing in and turning clockwise till you hear a click. You can slide off. Maybe you got to wiggle around a little bit, and that's the way that looks. And then you can look in here and get your date. On this one it's 6/3/1987, and remember, European style of date puts the day number before the month, so just a heads up on that one. I usually write that down and come over here and put it, so I got it on record. And now this is where our box comes in. Use that to hold the movement, and we'll start with this back one, removing this back one until you got it all the way unscrewed. I'm going to leave it there, and now when you do the front, put your finger on the movement and hold it in place and carefully loosen this so you don't want to whack your pallet fork and damage that. And the reason I'm holding this down is because there is kind of a pressure spring here that could push the movement up, and then we'll take this recoil spring and put it on this box and relieve the tension here at the winding arbor, and you can even hold it in place with your thumb to prevent damaging these teeth on this spring in here. This kind of winding spring has these teeth that are very fragile, and they bend off and break if you don't do that. Okay, now I can dump my screws out of the movement there carefully so we don't lose them. And go and pick those up, put them away. Alright, now relieving the wind on the mainspring is very important, because you don't want to take this movement apart with the spring all wound up and you throw and damage all your gears and break your pivots on your escape wheel and pallet fork. And to do that, we put our finger on top of the gear, our thumb on the gear, take the tweezers, lift off of the gear with these little teeth, and then carefully let go with our thumb, unwinding the mainspring. Okay, let those back down. And so now there's no power on the movement, and if your clock was just overwound, you know, it's been serviced, you know, it runs, it's just overwound. Now we would put this back on. Okay, put it back on, put the screws in it, stand it up, give it 1, 2, 3, 4 pumps, put the regulating lever back into the center, let it run for a day, monitor the rotation of the balance wheel and such, put your dial and hands on, back on, just reverse of what we just did there, and let it run like that for another day, observing the timekeeping. If it's running slow now, or if you have low balance rotation, give it another one pump on this back spring here. You're going to manually wind the mainspring by pumping this return spring on the back. Okay, all the way. Give it another one, so now you're up to 5 pumps, and let it run and observe timekeeping again. And when you're letting it run, take your cover here and set that back on top of the clock to keep your dust off of it. Okay, so you're going to, let it run on your bench and put your cover right over it here just to keep the dust off of it. Let it run. Well, once you got it all regulated and keeping time, and you know that the mainspring is not overwound anymore, you can stop it and turn your case upside down and put the screws back in and put your case back together. And so that's as far as we're gonna go on this today, just to show you how to relieve the wind on the mainspring in Atmos 540. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, check out the website, and